Web3. You've probably heard that term a lot lately. And depending on who you listen to, it promises one of two things. Either it's this decentralized utopia, a brand new, better internet for all of us, or it's a super risky, unregulated casino. So which is it? Well, in this explainer, we're going to cut through all that hype, all the smoke and mirrors, to find out what's really going on. We're going to separate the real-world solutions from the speculation and figure out where this whole Web3 thing is actually headed. Okay, so before we can even begin to judge Web3, we have to understand the problem it's supposedly trying to solve. And that problem, well, it's at the very heart of the internet we use every single day, the one we call Web 2. So why do we even need a new internet? Let's start right there. Now, this quote is pointing to a pretty extreme example for sure, but it highlights a fundamental truth about our current internet. The way it's built, where all our data gets collected and stored in these huge central databases, means it can become a tool for control. And even in less dramatic ways, this core idea of data centralization, it affects every single one of us. Think back to the early internet for a second. That was Web 1. It was basically a giant digital library. You could read stuff, but that was about it. Then came Web 2, the interactive web we know today, with social media, e-commerce, all of it. It was a total revolution, but it came with a huge catch. A handful of massive tech companies built the platforms we all use, and in doing so, they ended up in control of, well, everything. The platforms, the infrastructure, and most importantly, all of our data. So, how do these giant platforms actually make money? It really boils down to one simple thing: advertising. And it's all fueled by your data. Every click, every like, your entire digital life gets packaged up and sold. You're not the customer. You are the product being sold. This model also means a single company can just decide to delete your entire digital life overnight. And it creates these massive centralized vaults of personal information, which are, a huge target for hackers. And that is where Web3 finally enters the picture. The idea, the big promise, is that it's a fundamental rewiring of the internet. Instead of your data living on some company's private server, it would live on a blockchain, a distributed, public ledger that anyone can see but no one can control. The goal is to take that power away from the tech giants and give ownership of data, identity, and assets back to you, the user. Okay, so that's the promise, and it sounds incredible, right? But a promise is one thing. Reality is often something else entirely. So we have to ask the really tough question: is Web3 actually delivering on this core ideal of decentralization? So let's put those marketing slogans to the test. When you actually pop the hood on these so-called decentralized systems, what do you really find? Take a look at this. This image is basically a power map for something called a DAO, a decentralized autonomous organization. In theory, it's a leaderless, totally democratic way to run a project. But what this study from ETH Zurich actually shows is something very, very different. It reveals that in the real world, voting power isn't spread out at all. It flows to just a handful of super influential people. Those are the big red dots you see there. And here's the hard data to prove it. The study measured this imbalance using something called the Gini coefficient. It's the same scale economists use to measure wealth inequality. A score of 1 means one person has everything. This particular DAO scored a 0.91. That is an absolutely shocking concentration of power. It looks a lot like the very centralized systems Web3 claims it's here to fix. And the implication of that is pretty stark. It means that even if you have thousands of people participating, a tiny group has the potential power to control any vote. So while these systems might look decentralized on paper, in reality, they often just rebuild the same old power structures we already have. And whenever you have concentrated power, you also have concentrated risk. It's not just about governance either. The financial risks here are just staggering. According to a report from the International Body of Securities Regulators, over $3.1 billion was stolen in 2022 alone from so-called decentralized finance, or DeFi. And get this, a mind-boggling 82% of all crypto hacks that year specifically targeted these DeFi systems. And we're not just talking about random hackers in a basement. The reports show that state-sponsored groups, like those linked to North Korea, are some of the most successful attackers out there. They find weak spots, especially in the bridges that connect different blockchains, and then they use the DeFi system itself as a way to launder all the money they've stolen. So who's to blame when these massive losses happen? You often hear this defense in Web3. It's just code. But regulators are starting to push back with this really powerful idea, the responsible person. Their argument is simple.
No matter how decentralized a system claims to be, there's always someone, a founder, a key developer, a major investor, who has enough influence that they can and should be held accountable. The idea that nobody is in charge is, from their perspective, just a convenient fiction.
So far, I know, it sounds pretty bleak. Concentrated power, massive hacks, no one taking responsibility. You might be thinking this whole thing is a wash. But it would be a huge mistake to dismiss the entire technology just because of its flawed financial side. Because behind all that speculative hype, some genuinely exciting innovation is actually happening. See, the real potential of Web3 isn't about creating some new digital casino. It's in building entirely new systems for trust, for ownership, and for coordinating people to solve really tough, real-world problems. Let's start with one of the most fundamental things there is, your identity. Right now, your digital identity is just shattered into pieces across dozens of different companies. What if you could actually own and control it yourself? That's the idea behind verifiable credentials. Imagine your university issues you a digital diploma. You store it in your own private digital wallet on your phone. Then, when you apply for a job, you can prove you have that degree instantly. The company doesn't need to call the university because the credential's authenticity is baked right into the blockchain itself. You control who sees it and when. It's efficient and it protects your privacy. Okay, so let's jump from the digital world back into the physical one. How can this technology help us trust something as basic as the food that ends up on our plates? And this isn't some futuristic theory. Major companies are already doing it. Walmart uses a blockchain system to track food all the way from the farm to the store shelf. So now, if there's a contamination outbreak, they can trace the source in seconds, not days or weeks. Because every single step is logged on this unchangeable, shared record, it creates a transparent, trustworthy history that improves safety and efficiency for everybody. But maybe the most powerful use cases of all are the ones that have nothing to do with finance or retail, and everything to do with protecting basic human rights. The anti-human trafficking organization Polaris has designed a system to solve a critical, heartbreaking problem for exploited workers: the absolute terror of being the first person to speak up. What if you could report your abuser without immediately putting a target on your back? This is the idea of an information escrow. Here's how it works. A worker submits an encrypted report. It just sits there, safely, in a digital escrow, totally protected and unreadable. But if a second worker reports the very same employer, the system creates a match. It then automatically connects both of the victims with legal aid. It allows people to take collective action without that terrifying risk of being the one lone whistleblower. It's a truly profound use of this technology.
So what we have are two completely different pictures of Web3. On one side, you have this landscape of inequality and risk, and it's dominated by financial speculation. But on the other, you have a toolbox for building systems that can actually empower individuals and protect the vulnerable.
And this really is the crucial question. Is the future of Web3 about creating a more transparent, more equitable, and user-controlled internet? Or is it just about building a faster, more volatile, and completely unregulated version of Wall Street? The technology itself is neutral. It's just a tool. The direction it ultimately takes, well, that's up to the people building it and, just as importantly, the problems we all choose to solve with it.